In a world drowning in noise, clarity emerges as a rare gem, illuminating the battlefield of truth. This voice is ETN News24, a platform dedicated to unveiling the truth and defending the sovereignty of the people. Be part of the awakening. Together, we can cut through the noise and bring forth the truth for all. ETN News24 is a bastion of integrity, delivering unfiltered news that challenges the status quo.
The war in Sudan, it's already a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that's frankly hard to comprehend. We know it's fueled by the fight between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. But when we started digging into the source material for this deep dive, it revealed something much, much more disturbing underneath.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at two sides fighting with internal resources anymore. We're looking at this incredibly sophisticated transnational war economy, that's the term they use, and it's actively keeping the violence going, making it worse.
Exactly. And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To sort of pull back the curtain on what these reports are calling the shadow supply chains of death.
Heavy stuff.
It is. We're tracing the flow, and it's not just weapons we're talking about, but crucially, foreign fighters flowing directly to the RSF. The sources you shared, they connect the dots between Colombian mercenaries, really powerful allegations about Gulf financing, particularly the UAE, and these complex smuggling routes that stretch right across East Africa and the Horn.
Wow.
So we're really trying to unpack how this model, this kind of outsourced violence, is making the atrocities, especially in Darfur, so much deeper.
And if you're listening and looking for that one detail that just stops you in your tracks, the most, frankly, shocking thing in these reports, here it is. These investigations, they document former Colombian soldiers fighting for the RSF. Okay, maybe not totally surprising in the world of private military networks.
This happens.
But their role, this is critical and honestly horrifying. They aren't just fighters. The reports state they are instructing underage recruits, children.
And that finding, it's pivotal.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because it just removes any doubt, you know, about the link between this external help, this facilitation, and the actual war crimes being committed.
Yeah.
You've got highly trained foreign soldiers being paid good money to teach kids how to fight, how to wage war.
It's chilling.
It is. That's the human side, the immediate human equation of this whole shadow economy we're talking about.
So, okay, let's start unpacking this. Let's begin with the supply side. The mercenaries. Why Colombia? I mean, it seems like an incredibly long way to go to find fighters.
Well, it's not just the distance, though, that is remarkable. It's about a very specific skill set.
Okay.
You see, Colombia's own decades, really generations, of internal conflict created this huge pool of soldiers. Highly specific training, very experienced.
Right.
These are veterans. They know counterinsurgency, specialized tactics, stuff that's incredibly valuable if you're an organization like the RSF trying to, professionalize your forces.
And these soldiers become available.
Yeah. When they retire from the Colombian army, their pensions, often they're just not enough. It makes them, frankly, prime targets for private military companies, PMCs.
Who offer them a better deal.
A much better deal. Huge tax-free salaries often. It's purely about profit. This whole system, it runs on money, not on legal constraints or oversight, which makes Colombia, sadly, the perfect source.
And looking at what they actually do when they get there, the deployment reality, it's just brutal, isn't it?
It is.
They're recruited, flown over, deployed in combat, sure, but the sources really hammer home their role in training.
That's key.
And we have direct evidence from the sources, mercenaries admitting they trained recruits who were, children. It's almost unbelievable.
Yes, and there's that one phrase, that quote we pulled out from the material, it's just haunting. They were teaching these children, quote, to go and get killed.
God.
This influx, of trained foreign fighters, instructors, it gives the RSF a tactical edge, a training capacity they just wouldn't have otherwise.
Right.
And this foreign expertise, it links directly to the worsening humanitarian crisis. Especially right now, think about the siege of El Fasher. We're hearing about genocide-scale atrocities against civilians.
It fuels it directly.
It absolutely fuels it. These foreign elements, they intensify the fighting, and they basically prolong the RSF's ability to keep waging this horrific war.
Okay, so we've got the mercenaries sourced from Colombia. But then, how do they get there? How does the whole system work? We need to talk about the distribution network. This isn't just a few guys hopping on a plane, right? It needs a global logistics setup.
Precisely. Now we shift focus a bit.
Yeah.
From the soldiers themselves to the industrial scale logistics needed to move them and their supplies.
Right.
The demand, the money, and this vast logistical framework, it seems to be provided by brokers in the Gulf region and these private security companies. They handle the whole process.
Oh, they're the middlemen.
Exactly. They act as the contractors, the transporters, sometimes the financiers too. This whole infrastructure, that's the shadow supply chain.
But how does a private company manage that? Moving hundreds of men, potentially, across multiple countries. Sometimes, the sources mention, using large chartered cargo planes. How do they do that without setting off alarm bells everywhere? Without international scrutiny?
Well, that's let's say the genius and the horror of it.
Okay.
The sources indicate these networks are meticulous. They use commercial covers. They route operations through key air hubs, maritime ports across several different countries.
Spreading the risk.
Spreading the risk and ensuring that oversight bodies in any one place just don't see the whole picture. They exploit weak financial regulation, and they use something called dual-use cargo manifests.
Dual use, meaning?
Meaning the paperwork says they're shipping, say, mining equipment or agricultural supplies, sometimes even humanitarian aid, tragically. But this can serve as cover for weapons, ammunition, or other essential military supplies.
Clever and deeply cynical.
Very.
Let's map out these routes. You mentioned several transit corridors. Understanding the flow seems key to understanding how resilient this network is, how hard it is to shut down.
Okay, let's break it down. First, the sources point strongly towards Ethiopia.
Okay, Ethiopia.
It functions as a crucial logistical node, basically a transfer point. The reports highlight weak oversight there, plus its proximity to Sudan makes it ideal.
How do they use it?
Often for coordinating movements, moving personnel, and maybe material, using chartered flights. Again, usually under some kind of commercial cover, landing perhaps near the border area.
Yeah, so Ethiopia is one node. What else?
Second, we need to look towards the sea. The ports in the Horn of Africa, specifically Somalia and Somaliland.
Right, the ports.
Bosaso and Berbera are mentioned specifically. They're cited as critical maritime gateways. Think of them as entry points for stuff coming perhaps from the Arabian Peninsula or elsewhere.
So ships dock there, and then it goes overland.
That seems to be the route. Essential staging points before things move overland towards Sudan.
Okay, Ethiopia, Somaliland. Any others?
And finally, we really can't ignore Libya.
Libya. That seems further afield.
It is geographically more distant from the initial source, like Colombia, but its own internal chaos, the fragmented militias, the established smuggling routes. It seems to facilitate parallel transfers. Mercenaries, maybe different groups, weapons moving through those channels too. It just adds another layer of complexity, another route that makes sanctions or interdiction incredibly difficult.
So what's really crucial for you listening to this to grasp is that these aren't just random smuggling routes. They're sophisticated logistical corridors.
Exactly.
And they are what's keeping the RSF going at its current strength. Without this external industrialized supply chain, well, the conflict might look very different. It might grind down much faster.
Absolutely. It complicates every single effort towards regional stability, towards peace talks. You can't negotiate a lasting peace when one side is constantly being resupplied from the outside, using as a system designed precisely to avoid detection.
Which brings us, inevitably, I suppose, to the money, the financial backing. Our sources state pretty directly that multiple investigative reports allege UAE financial and logistical backing for the RSF. Funneled, it seems, through these private military firms, despite, it has to be said, official denials from the UAE government.
And the mechanism here, the how, is really the most important part to understand. It boils down to that concept we mentioned earlier, plausible deniability.
Explain that again. How does it work in this context?
Well, you have these powerful private security industries, often based in the Gulf. They use these permissive cargo routes we just talked about. All this creates layers, distance legally and geographically between the alleged sponsors, like the UAE in these reports, and the actual atrocities happening on the ground in Darfur.
So the distance itself becomes the product they're buying.
In a way, yes.
Right.
Certainly. Think about it. If a powerful state or some wealthy entity wants to influence a war, they don't, wire money directly to a warlord's bank account anymore. That's too risky.
Right.
Instead, they contract a PMC, maybe a firm registered in a completely different country. That PMC then hires fighters from, say, Colombia. It uses logistics hubs in Ethiopia or ports in Somalia. It moves the men, the material.
Layers upon layers.
Exactly. Layers of intermediaries. So the money trail, It doesn't lead back to direct military action. It leads back to what looks like a legitimate private security contract or a major cargo charter agreement.
Wow, okay.
And that system, that layering, it provides almost ironclad, plausible deniability for sponsors. Even while it directly enables and worsens the atrocities, the distance is the shield.
So pulling the threads together here, what we have is a system, external help channeled through these contracting intermediaries, potentially linked back to Gulf actors, according to these reports, enables this systematic, almost industrial-scale flow of fighters and weapons into Sudan.
That's the picture the sources paint.
And that shield you mentioned, that plausible deniability, it leads straight to impunity, doesn't it? Which brings us to the serious legal gaps the source material talks about.
Yes, talking about legal impunity is absolutely essential because it explains why this trade can keep going almost out in the open in some ways.
How?
Well, we're dealing with, frankly, weak enforcement of existing international laws. UN conventions on mercenaries, on child soldiers, they exist.
But they're not working here.
Not effectively. Because the fighters are often recruited under private contracts, they're not directly employed by a state army. So they kind of slip through the cracks of traditional international military justice.
The sources we looked at identified two specific ways this impunity is maintained: arms re-exports and the use of private contracting. Can you just quickly break down arms re-exports for us?
Sure. Think of it simply like this. Country A buys weapons legally from country B. The deal usually includes an agreement, an end-user certificate saying these weapons are for country A's own defense. They can't just sell them on.
All right.
The loophole happens when country A or an entity within it, maybe a private firm, immediately sells or exports those weapons to a third party, often another private military firm or maybe a shell company.
And that third party funnels them into the conflict zone.
Exactly, in violation of the original agreement.
Okay.
But the paper trail is deliberately muddied. It ensures the original seller, country B, and maybe even country A's government, can claim they had no idea. Plausible deniability again.
Okay, that makes sense. And the private contracting mechanism, how does that feed impunity?
Well, that's about using the PMCs to hire individuals rather than deploying state forces. So the sponsors, whoever is funding this, can avoid classifying the fighters as state actors.
Bypassing international laws about state aggression.
Precisely. It sidesteps laws against direct state involvement in a foreign conflict. These loopholes, combined, allow what one source chillingly calls the industrialization of atrocity to just carry on largely unchecked.
And the immediate human cost of this industrialization, it's just staggering, because these shadow supply chains keep the RSF armed and manned.
Yes.
We see humanitarian access collapsing, civilians facing starvation, and the reports are clear. The presence of these foreign fighters is dramatically intensifying the conflict in places like Darfur, accelerating that genocide-scale violence, especially now in El Fasher.
That link is absolutely crucial to understand. Every single mercenary flown in, every shipment of supplies that gets through this network, it makes the humanitarian disaster exponentially worse.
So the big question then is, how do we dismantle this? How do we stop it? Thankfully, the source material doesn't just diagnose the problem. It does offer some clear, actionable steps. Things that need to happen to disrupt this transnational war economy. And it seems to start with transparency.
That has to be the first step, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The sources strongly recommend enforcing mandatory transparency, particularly on charter flights and cargo manifests moving through the Horn of Africa.
Forcing it into the light?
Exactly. Force these shadow networks out into the open. Try to stop the physical flow of material. And, crucially, they also call for mandating proper international investigations into the child recruitment, into the RSF atrocities overall.
Holding individuals accountable.
Yes. Holding the people who actually train children to kill accountable, not just focusing on the distant financiers, though they need attention too.
And speaking of the financiers, focusing on the money itself, choking off the source.
Yes, that's vital, which means much tighter regulation on these private military firms and their funding sources, especially, the reports suggest, in Gulf states.
So if the money flows through these complex intermediary firms?
Those firms need massive scrutiny. They need regulation to stop them just being tools for state-adjacent plausible deniability. We need to make it harder for them to operate this way.
And the sources also mention looking back at the supply countries, like Colombia, addressing the root causes there.
Yes, that's an important angle too. Supporting veteran welfare programs in places like Colombia. The argument is, if highly trained former soldiers aren't pushed into the mercenary market just to survive because their pensions aren't enough,
you shrink the pool.
You significantly shrink the available pool of fighters for these PMCs. And finally, of course, the immediate priority, securing humanitarian corridors, especially into El Fasher right now. That's just essential to save civilian lives caught in this externally fueled nightmare.
So when we pull this all together, the core takeaway for you listening is pretty stark. Sudan's war isn't just an internal conflict anymore, if it ever truly was.
Yeah.
It seems to have morphed into a template, a kind of blueprint for a new way of fighting wars, this transnational war economy, driven by profit, enabled by foreign mercenaries, and built entirely around the sophisticated system of plausible deniability.
And this raises a really profound question, I think, one that needs serious international attention. If this is the new model, external financing, outsourced violence, where the sponsors are kept deliberately distant, legally and geographically, where the whole point of the operation is to avoid accountability, then what legal tools, what diplomatic pressure can ever truly hold those remote facilitators responsible, especially when plausible deniability is the very thing they're paying for?
A deeply unsettling thought.
It is, and it leads to a final question for you, the listener. What's our role? What's your role in demanding transparency, in demanding accountability for these shadow supply chains that fuel such terrible atrocities so far away from where the money might actually originate?